On June the 22nd, 2026, Thomann sued Fender. The world's largest online musical instrument retailer just declared war on one of the most legendary names in bass and guitar history. And the weapons they are fighting over are shapes: the precision bass, the jazz bass, the Stratocaster, outlines that basses and guitars have worn for 70 years. Imagine walking into a shop, picking up a $200 bass that plays beautifully, and being told you are not allowed to buy it. Not because it is a copy of someone's logo, not because it stole someone's electronics, but because of its shape, the outline, the silhouette. That is not a hypothetical anymore. Right now, in a courtroom in Germany, a fight is playing out that could decide whether the most common bass shapes on Earth can be legally owned by a single company. And almost every affordable and boutique bass you love is caught in the middle of it. This is the story nobody in the bass world is telling you, because everyone is looking at the guitars. But the moment you understand what is actually happening, you will realize your instrument, your next instrument, and the entire budget bass market are all sitting directly in the blast radius. Let me walk you through it, step by step, with the real dates and the real court documents, and then you can decide for yourself who is right. Let's start with what just happened, because it is genuinely stunning. On June the 22nd, 2026, Thomann, the largest online musical instrument retailer on the planet, did something almost unheard of. They sued Fender. Not a strongly worded letter, not an angry blog post, an actual lawsuit filed in court. And here is the part that matters most. Thomann did not sue only to protect its own house brand, Harley Benton. According to Thomann's own statement, they filed on behalf of the entire industry, naming smaller builders like Suhr, Tom Anderson, Tyler, LSL Instruments, Maybach, Pensa, and, notice this name carefully, FGN. If you have watched my videos before, you know exactly who FGN is. It is Fujigen, the legendary Japanese factory that literally built Fender's own instruments for over a decade. That is how upside down this has become. So how did we get to a retailer suing a guitar giant on behalf of everyone? To understand that, you have to go back to a quiet courtroom in Dusseldorf, Germany on December the 22nd, 2025. Case number 14, C064/25. Fender had gone after a Chinese manufacturer called Yiwu Philharmonic Musical Instruments, one of countless factories churning out cheap copies sold through platforms like AliExpress. Yiwu never even showed up to defend itself, so Fender won by default. But the German court did not stop at a simple ruling against one factory. It declared that the Fender Stratocaster body shape, the S-style silhouette, is a protected work of applied art under German and European copyright law. Read that again slowly. A court ruled that a body shape, a 70-year-old outline, can be copyrighted like a painting or a sculpture. And because it falls under European copyright, that protection does not just cover Germany. It reaches across the entire European Union. The ruling even specifies why the protection extends so far into the future. Leo Fender, who designed these instruments, died in 1991, and under European copyright law, protection runs for 50 years after the creator's death. That puts these shapes under lock until 2041. Now you might be thinking, that is a guitar shape. I play bass. Why should I care? And this is exactly the part the guitar channels are glossing over. Because the legal theory that just won in Dusseldorf does not care whether the instrument has 4 strings or 6. If the outline of a Stratocaster can be owned as a work of art, then the outline of a precision bass and the outline of a jazz bass, the two most copied, most beloved, most foundational shapes in the entire history of the bass guitar, are sitting right there as the obvious next target. And here is the proof that this is not paranoia. Look again at who has already been hit. Harley Benton, the budget brand that makes some of the best value basses on Earth, already received a cease and desist. FGN, the Japanese factory behind countless classic basses, is on Thomann's list. Bass brands like Spector and Lachlan, who stood together to fight Fender's earlier shape claims back in 2009, are watching this case extremely carefully. This is already a Bass story. Most people just have not noticed yet, because that is what a cease and desist actually demands, and it is brutal. According to multiple industry reports, Fender's letters, sent out starting in May of 2026, did not politely ask builders to reconsider. They demanded that companies immediately stop production of S-style instruments, recall guitars and basses already sold into Europe, destroy their unsold stock, and most chillingly, hand over their customer and their sales data. Imagine building honest instruments for 20 years and receiving a letter telling you to burn your inventory and surrender your customer list. For a small builder, that is not a warning. That is a death sentence delivered by mail. But to understand why Fender is doing this now, you have to understand something they would probably rather you forgot. They are not doing this from a position of strength. They are doing it because they lost. And the story of how they lost is the most important part of this whole saga. Go back to October 2014. John Mayer, at that point Fender's most valuable living ambassador, walked away from the brand. And the reason was not money, and it was not ego. By many accounts, it was craft. That same year, Fender pushed out Mike Eldred, the head of the custom shop and Mayer's main creative partner inside the company. With Eldred gone, the decisions inside Fender, by this telling, started shifting from the workshop to the spreadsheet. Mayer had ideas for refining that 70-year-old double cutaway design, and he could not get them built. So he took those exact ideas to Paul Reed Smith instead. For nearly 3 years, Mayer and PRS obsessed over every detail, the neck curves, the pickup winds, the tiny refinements Fender would not make. In 2018, they released the PRS Silver Sky, and the reaction at first was savage. Purists mocked the headstock. They called it a cheap clone, an insult, a betrayal, and then players actually picked it up and played it. The mockery evaporated almost overnight, replaced by a wave of buyers who simply preferred it. By 2021, sales data showed the unthinkable. The PRS Silver Sky had become a top-selling electric on the platform, reportedly outselling every individual American-made Stratocaster model. Sit with that. A competitor took Fender's own rejected ideas and beat them, in the market, on the sales floor, fair and square. And that is the pattern, the exact pattern this entire channel is built on. Whether it is PRS outdesigning the Stratocaster, or Sire and Sadowski, and Lackland, and Harley Benton, quietly outbuilding the Precision and the Jazz bass, for a fraction of the price, the story's always the same. Someone builds it better, or cheaper, or both, and the legacy brand loses the argument where it actually counts, in the hands of real players. The problem is what happens next. Because when a corporation loses on the sales floor, it does not always go back to the workshop. Sometimes it goes to the courtroom. And Fender had tried the courtroom before and failed. Back in 2009, the United States Trademark Trial and Appeal Board flatly rejected Fender's attempt to trademark the Stratocaster silhouette. The coalition that lined up against them included bass and guitar brands alike, ESP Guitars, Schecter, Peavey, Warmoth, Spectre, and others who collectively argued the shape had long since entered the public domain. The lawyer who led that defense, Ronald Benstock of Fox Rothschild LLP, made a case that the board found impossible to dismiss. The reason was almost poetic. The shape had become too generic, too universal, too public. It had become, in the board's view, the default symbol for an electric guitar itself, the outline a dictionary would use to illustrate the very word. You cannot own a shape that has become everyone's shape. That is what American trademark law said. And Ronald Benstock, who beat Fender then, is once again in the conversation as builders look for legal footing to fight the current wave of cease and desist letters. So Fender needed a different weapon. And this is the clever, and to a lot of people the deeply cynical, maneuver at the heart of the whole story. They stopped arguing trademark and started arguing copyright, not in America, but in Europe, where the law works differently, claiming the body is an original work of applied art. And in that quiet Dusseldorf courtroom against Yiwu Philharmonic, a defendant who never showed up, that theory finally won. It is worth being precise here. Even in a default judgment, the German judge still had to confirm the design met European originality standards, and the court did. So the ruling is real, but its reach has a hard limit. A German copyright ruling binds Germany and the European Union. It is not the whole world. And that limit is exactly the crack Thomann is now driving a wedge into. Because Thomann's argument is beautifully simple, and it is the argument every bass player should understand. They are saying the S-style shape, and by extension these classic body shapes including the precision bass and jazz bass silhouettes, are not pure art. They are function. The double cutaway exists so your hand can reach the upper frets. The contours exist for balance and comfort against your body. Form follows function. And under the law, purely functional shapes are much harder to lock away as private art. Thomann, with over $1 billion in annual sales, is one of the very few companies on earth with the scale and the financial nerve to actually take that argument to court and force the question into the open instead of quietly folding like Fender's letters wanted everyone to. Now, Fender's CEO Andy Mooney, and more recently Edward Bud Cole, has publicly tried to downplay all of this, insisting the company is not suing anyone. And technically, in the narrowest sense, a cease and desist is not a lawsuit. But out in the real world of small builders and retailers, a cease and desist backed by an actual court ruling is not a friendly suggestion. It is an ultimatum. Stop, recall, destroy, and hand over your data, or we will see you in court, where we have already won once. For a company with no legal war chest, the letter alone is enough to end them, which is precisely why the ones who can fight, PRS, who simply replied that they disagree with Fender's assessment, and Thomann, who went all the way to court, matters so much. They are fighting the battle that hundreds of smaller builders and every bargain-hunting bass player cannot fight for themselves. So let's be clear about what is actually at stake for you, the person who just wants a good bass. If Fender ultimately wins this, and the copyright theory holds and spreads, the consequences ripple straight into the instrument in your hands. The boutique builders who make those incredible precision and jazz-style basses could be forced to stop or redesign. The budget brands that put a genuinely good bass in a beginner's hands for $200 could be squeezed out of the biggest market in the world. Even the used market, the vintage market, the entire second-hand ecosystem that keeps great basses affordable and in circulation, all of it could be thrown into legal chaos. The very thing that makes this hobby accessible, the fact that the classic shapes belong to everyone, is what is on the table. And if Thomann wins, then the shape stays where it has been for 70 years, in the commons, belonging to all of us, free for a Japanese factory, an American boutique, a German budget brand, or a kid in a bedroom with a soldering iron to build and improve and sell. The future of the bass, open instead of enclosed. There is one final bitter irony in all of this, and it is worth sitting with. John Mayer left Fender in the first place because they refused to build the guitar he imagined. They would not do the craft. Now, years later, the company seems more focused than ever on building something else entirely. Not better instruments, not the designs their own artists were begging for, just cases, just letters, just legal strategy aimed at winning in a courtroom the argument they had already lost in the hands of players. For 70 years, the value of these instruments was built on emotion, on connection, on the feeling of picking one up. You cannot copyright that, and you cannot sue your way back to it. So I will leave you with the question this entire fight really comes down to. Can anyone, any corporation, no matter how legendary, truly own the shape of the bass, the shape of the precision bass, the jazz bass, the silhouette that belongs to every player who ever plugged in? A German court, Case 14 CO 64/25, is about to help answer that, and the outcome will shape what you are allowed to buy, build, and play for the rest of your life. Tell me in the comments where you stand. Should a classic shape belong to one company or to all of us? And if this made you see your cheap, brilliant, defiantly shaped bass a little differently, share it with someone who needs to know their instrument is part of this fight. Subscribe to follow this battle as it unfolds, because it is very far from over, and I would be genuinely glad to have you along for the ride.